Airports are strange places at night. During the day, they're full of purpose. People rushing toward gates, dragging suitcases, checking their phones, chasing connections. But after midnight, everything feels different. The bright lights seem colder. The hallways seem longer, and every traveler starts looking like someone who's carrying a story they haven't told yet. I was sitting near gate 27B when the first delay notification appeared. Flight 814 to Denver, Delhi side. Not because I was surprised. Winter storms had been moving across the Midwest all day. The weather reports had been warning everyone for hours. Still, a delay meant missing my hotel, missing sleep, and most likely spending the night inside an airport. I leaned back in the uncomfortable chair and looked through the giant windows overlooking the runway. Snow was already falling. Not heavily, not yet, but enough to turn the airport lights into blurry circles floating in the darkness. My phone buzzed, a message from my boss. "Any chance you'll make the morning meeting?" I stared at it for a moment, then replied, "Only if I learn how to fly the plane myself." A few seconds later, he sent back a laughing emoji, helpful, very helpful. I slipped my phone into my pocket and walked toward the nearest coffee stand. The line was long. Everyone suddenly needed caffeine when they realized they weren't going anywhere. While waiting, I glanced around the terminal. Families, business travelers. College students sleeping on backpacks, a man arguing with customer service, nothing unusual. Then I saw her. At first, I thought I was mistaken. Airports do that sometimes. You think you recognize someone. Then they turn around and become a complete stranger. But this time, it wasn't a stranger. It was her Margaret Lawson, my ex-wife's mother. For a second, I honestly wondered if exhaustion was making me hallucinate, because the odds of finding her in an airport 3 states away felt impossible. She was standing near a charging station, elegant as always, long camel-colored coat, dark scarf, a small leather travel bag resting beside her. She looked exactly the way I remembered, graceful, confident, completely out of place in the chaos around her. Then she looked up and saw me. The surprise on her face matched my own. "Ethan?" I laughed quietly. That's exactly what I was about to say. For a moment, neither of us moved. 3 years had passed since my divorce from Claire. 3 years since I'd sat across from anyone in her family. And now, out of every airport in America, out of every possible night, I was standing face to face with the last person I ever expected to see. The storm outside continued to grow stronger, and somehow, I had the feeling that missing my flight was about to become the least surprising thing that happened that night. For a few seconds, neither of us seemed to know what to say. The airport noise continued around us. Announcements echoed through the terminal. Suitcases rolled across polished floors. People hurried past without noticing the strange reunion unfolding between us. Margaret recovered first. A small smile appeared on her face. Well, she looked around the crowded terminal. "This certainly wasn't on my travel itinerary," I laughed. "Mine either." The smile remained. But there was something else in her eyes, a kind of nervousness I didn't remember seeing before, not during family holidays, not during my marriage, not ever. She glanced toward the large windows overlooking the runway. "The weather looks awful." I followed her gaze. The snowfall had become noticeably heavier. "It does. Where were you headed?" "Denver," she nodded. "Business trip?" "Unfortunately." That earned a small laugh. "And you?" She hesitated. "Chicago? Conference?" Again, that hesitation, just for a second. Something like that. The answer felt oddly incomplete, but I let it go. 3 years of silence doesn't give you the right to interrogate people. Not immediately, anyway. A loud announcement interrupted us. "Attention passengers. Due to severe weather conditions, all outbound flights have been temporarily suspended." A collective groan spread through the terminal. Everyone looked up at the departure boards. More red notifications appeared. "Delayed. Cancelled." Margaret folded her arms. "That's not encouraging. No, it isn't." For a moment, we stood side by side watching travelers react to the news. Then she looked at me. "Have you eaten?" The question surprised me. "Not since lunch." Same. She pointed toward a restaurant near the center of the terminal. "If we're trapped here, we might as well be trapped with decent food." I smiled. "That sounds suspiciously reasonable. I've been told that about myself." The restaurant wasn't busy yet. Most people were still hoping the delays would magically disappear. We found a small table near the windows. The airport lights reflected softly against the glass. Outside, snow covered everything. Inside, the warmth felt almost comforting. For the first few minutes, the conversation stayed safe. Work, travel, weather. The usual subjects people discuss when they're carefully avoiding more important ones. Then Margaret stirred her coffee and looked at me. "Claire told me you bought a house." The mention of my ex-wife caught me off guard. "She did?" Margaret nodded. "She sounded happy for you." I wasn't sure how to respond. 3 years had passed, yet somehow hearing Claire's name still felt like opening a door I wasn't certain I wanted to walk through. Margaret seemed to notice. She changed the subject immediately. The kindness of that didn't go unnoticed. Outside, the storm continued to strengthen. Inside, the hours ahead suddenly felt much longer than either of us had expected. And somewhere deep down, I was beginning to realize this wasn't going to be an ordinary night at the airport. By 10 o'clock, the airport had stopped pretending everything was under control. The departure boards looked like a sea of bad news. Cancelled, delayed, cancelled. Every few minutes, another flight disappeared from the schedule. The restaurant had filled with stranded travelers. Families spread blankets across rows of seats. Business travelers sat hunched over laptops, desperately trying to salvage tomorrow's meetings. Children slept against their parents' shoulders. And outside, the storm continued to grow. Margaret and I had moved to a quieter seating area overlooking the runway. Neither of us had anywhere else to be. The airport had become a strange little world of its own. A place suspended between departures and arrivals, between plans and reality. Margaret was reading something on her tablet. I was pretending to answer emails. Neither of us was accomplishing much. Finally, I closed my laptop. I officially give up. She looked up. Work? Productivity. A smile touched her lips. Good. You've been answering the same email for 20 minutes. You noticed that? You deleted and rewrote the first sentence 6 times. I laughed. That's unsettling. I told you, I notice things. The answer reminded me of something. Years ago, during my marriage, Claire had once said exactly the same thing. For a moment, the memory caught me off guard. Margaret seemed to sense it. Her expression softened. Some habits run in families. I nodded. I suppose they do. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. Oddly enough, it felt comfortable, like we had skipped past the formal stage of being strangers again. A loud groan suddenly echoed across the terminal. Dozens of passengers were staring at the large departure screens. A new announcement appeared. Airport hodls, fully booked. I whistled quietly. That's going to make some people unhappy. Margaret glanced at the screen. Some? Most. She smiled. I admire your optimism. A few minutes later, her phone rang. She looked at the caller ID, then answered. Hello, Claire. My stomach tightened instantly. Margaret noticed. She turned slightly away, giving me privacy, even though I couldn't hear much of the conversation. Still, hearing Claire's name after all this time felt strange. Like hearing a song you hadn't realized you still remembered. The call lasted only a few minutes. When she hung up, she stared at the screen for a moment. You okay? I asked. She smiled. Yes. But the answer came a little too quickly, a little too carefully. I noticed. And for the first time that evening, I wondered if Margaret's trip wasn't quite what she had claimed. Outside, snow hammered against the giant windows. The runways had disappeared beneath white drifts. The airport no longer looked temporary. It looked permanent. Like nobody was leaving anytime soon, Margaret slipped her phone into her purse. Then she looked at me. There was hesitation in her eyes, as if she wanted to say something, as if she'd been deciding whether to tell me something all night. But instead, she simply smiled and changed the subject. At the time, I let it go. I didn't know then that the real reason she was in that airport had absolutely nothing to do with Chicago. And before sunrise, she was finally going to tell me the truth. By midnight, the airport had transformed into something else entirely. It no longer felt like a place people passed through. It felt like a place people were stuck in. Every chair was occupied. Every charging station was surrounded. Travelers had started building temporary camps from jackets, blankets, and carry-on luggage. The excitement of travel had disappeared. Now there was only waiting. Margaret and I sat near one of the large observation windows overlooking the snow-covered runways. Neither of us had spoken much during the last half hour. The storm outside seemed to have swallowed the world. The airport lights barely penetrated the snowfall. You know, Margaret said suddenly. What? This reminds me of college, I laughed. Your college sounds far more dramatic than mine. Oh, it was, she smiled. One winter, a snowstorm trapped half the campus in the library for 2 days. And we survived almost entirely on vending machine food. Sounds terrible. It was, she laughed. But 20 years later, it's one of my favorite memories. I looked at her. Why? She thought about it. Because unexpected things force people to be honest. The answer lingered between us. Then a loudspeaker announcement interrupted. Attention passengers. Due to worsening weather conditions, all remaining departures have been canceled until further notice. The terminal erupted with frustration. A few people groaned. Others immediately reached for their phones. Some simply stared at the screens in disbelief. Margaret looked toward the departure board. Well, I nodded. Looks like we're officially spending the night here. The strange thing was, the news didn't bother me as much as it should have. Maybe because there was nothing I could do about it. Or maybe because I wasn't spending the night alone, a nearby airport employee began distributing small travel kits. Blankets, pillows, bottled water, the sort of emergency supplies nobody wants to need. Margaret accepted one, then handed the blanket directly to me. I frowned. What about you? I have a coat. It's freezing in here. So is your judgment. I laughed. Some things never changed. She had always taken care of people without making a big deal about it. Claire used to do the same thing. The thought arrived unexpectedly. And for once, it didn't hurt. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, the airport grew quieter. People settled into long, uncomfortable nights. The lights dimmed slightly. A cleaning crew pushed carts through the terminal. The entire place felt suspended in time. Margaret stared out at the snow. You know something strange? What? If this flight hadn't been canceled, we probably never would have seen each other again. I looked at her. The statement was simple, matter of fact, yet something about it felt important. Like there was more hidden beneath it. Before I could answer, she looked away, back toward the storm. And for the second time that night, I saw that same expression, the one that said she was carrying something she hadn't told me, something she wasn't quite ready to share. Yet, but the night was still young, and we had many hours left before morning. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the airport had become surprisingly quiet. Not silent. Airports are never silent. There was still the distant hum of cleaning machines, the occasional announcement, the soft sound of people shifting in uncomfortable chairs, but compared to earlier, it felt peaceful. Most travelers had surrendered to the night. Some slept across rows of seats. Others used backpacks as pillows. The storm outside continued to bury the runways beneath fresh snow. Margaret and I sat near a 24-hour coffee stand that somehow seemed determined to outlive the apocalypse. The employee behind the counter looked exhausted. I couldn't blame him. He had probably served coffee to half the airport. Margaret wrapped both hands around a paper cup. You know, she looked around the nearly empty terminal. This might be the most expensive cup of coffee I've ever purchased, I smiled. Airport pricing? No. She looked toward the snow-covered windows. The airfare. That made me laugh harder than it should have. The employee behind the counter looked over. Margaret seemed pleased with herself. You always laughed at terrible jokes. That wasn't a terrible joke. It absolutely was. She smiled into her coffee. The warmth between us felt natural now, comfortable, like old friends rediscovering a conversation that had simply been paused. For a while, we talked about harmless things. Books, travel, terrible hotel breakfasts. The kinds of subjects people discuss when they're enjoying each other's company without realizing it. Then Margaret asked a question, one simple question, and suddenly everything changed. Are you happy, Ethan? I looked at her. The question caught me completely off guard. Most people ask if you're busy or successful or doing well. Very few ask if you're actually happy. I stared into my coffee, thinking, some days. She nodded, only nodded, as if she understood exactly what that answer meant. And you? A small smile appeared. Some days. I laughed softly. That's suspiciously similar. It seemed fair. For a moment, we sat quietly watching snowdrift against the giant windows, then Margaret spoke again. Claire told me something after the divorce. I looked up. The mention of my ex-wife still carried weight, not pain, just history. What did she say? Margaret hesitated. Not long, just enough for me to notice. She said she worried about you. I looked away. That sounds like Claire. She never stopped caring. The words landed gently, not like a wound, more like a memory. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, the airport lights reflected in the glass. Margaret took another sip of coffee, then she looked down at her cup, almost as though she were gathering courage. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, more serious. Ethan, yes, there is a reason I'm here tonight. I felt something shift immediately. The air between us changed, the conversation changed, everything changed. And for the first time since we'd met again, I realized Margaret hadn't come to that airport by accident. She had come for something, or someone, and somehow, I was beginning to suspect that person might be me. For a moment, I simply looked at her. The airport around us seemed to disappear. The distant announcements, the cleaning crews, the travelers sleeping beneath blankets, none of it mattered anymore, only Margaret's words. There is a reason I'm here tonight. I set my coffee down. What do you mean? Margaret stared into her cup, as if the answer were somewhere inside it. Then she smiled softly. Do you remember the summer barbecue at Claire's parents' house? I laughed. You're going to have to be more specific. There were many. This one ended with you falling into the lake. I groaned. That narrows it down. For the first time that night, she laughed openly. The kind of laugh that made people around her smile without knowing why. You spent the entire evening pretending you weren't embarrassed. I was embarrassed. No, She shook her head. You were determined. The memory surfaced unexpectedly. A warm summer evening, a crowded backyard, Claire laughing, her father cooking hamburgers, Margaret sitting quietly beneath a tree with a book she never actually read. It felt like a lifetime ago. Why are you thinking about that night? I asked. Margaret's smile faded gently, because it was the first time I realized something. I waited. She looked out toward the snow-covered runway. I realized you were lonely. The words caught me off guard. Claire was standing right beside me. I know. Her answer came immediately. And she loved you. I know that too. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Just honest. Margaret folded her hands together. People assume loneliness means being alone. She looked at me. It doesn't. I looked away, because I knew exactly what she meant. There had been moments during my marriage when I felt disconnected from my own life. Not unhappy, not unloved, just somewhere else. Margaret seemed to understand, without me saying any of it. You noticed too much. A small smile appeared. I've been accused of that before. You were watching me? Her eyes widened. That sounds much worse than it actually was. I laughed. Good. Because airport security is already suspicious enough. That earned another laugh. Then the conversation quieted again. The comfortable kind of quiet. The kind that only happens when two people stop performing for each other. After a while, Margaret spoke. When Claire left, I wanted to call you. I turned toward her. You did? She nodded. Many times. Why didn't you? Her expression changed. Not sad, not exactly. More complicated than that. I wasn't sure it was my place. The answer felt incomplete. Like there was more beneath it, and she knew it too. Because after a long pause, she looked directly at me, then quietly said, The truth is, I wasn't afraid of what people would think. I was afraid of why I wanted to call. And suddenly, for the first time that night, I realized this conversation was becoming something neither of us had expected. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The airport seemed quieter than ever. Most of the stranded passengers had fallen asleep. The storm still raged beyond the giant windows, but inside, everything felt strangely still. Margaret looked down at her hands, then she let out a slow breath. I suppose I've delayed this conversation long enough. I tried to smile. That's usually a dangerous way to begin a sentence. It usually is. But she wasn't smiling, not this time. Something about her had changed. The warmth was still there, the kindness, the familiar calm. But now there was vulnerability too. The kind that only appears when someone is finally ready to tell the truth. Ethan. She looked directly at me. The conference wasn't real. I blinked. What? There is no conference. For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood. You flew across the country? Without a reason? No. Her voice softened. I had a reason. I stared at her, then slowly leaned back in my chair. Okay, I feel like we're skipping several chapters of the story. That earned the smallest smile. Probably. The smile disappeared almost immediately. She looked toward the snow-covered runway. I told Claire I was attending a professional event. You lied to her? I omitted details. That's a very lawyer-like answer. I know. The honesty surprised me, and somehow made me trust her even more. I waited. Eventually, she continued. 3 months ago, I received a call from a doctor. My stomach tightened immediately. Are you sick? She shook her head. No. The relief hit me so quickly I almost laughed. Don't do that. Do what? Start sentences like that. For the first time all night, she laughed. Then her expression softened again. The doctor wasn't calling about me. I frowned. Then who? My older sister. I had met her once, years ago, briefly, at a family gathering. Margaret stared at the floor. She passed away in October. My heart sank. I'm sorry. She nodded quietly. Thank you. For a while, neither of us spoke. The airport lights reflected across the polished floor. Snow drifted endlessly beyond the windows. Then Margaret continued. Before she died, she told me something. I listened. She said life becomes very short very quickly. Her eyes looked distant, as though she were hearing the words again. She asked me a question. What question? Margaret swallowed. Then smiled sadly. If tomorrow was your last day, who would you regret never seeing again? The question landed like a stone between us. I didn't know what to say, because suddenly, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Margaret looked down at her coffee cup, then quietly whispered, For weeks, I tried to think of anyone else. My chest tightened. She finally looked at me, and for the first time that night, there was absolutely no hiding behind polite conversation, no changing the subject, no careful distance. Only truth, and when she spoke again, her voice barely rose above a whisper. Ethan, the reason I came here was you. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I had misheard her. The reason she came here was me. The words seemed impossible. Margaret looked away first, toward the snow-covered runways, toward the storm, anywhere except me, as though saying it aloud had somehow made it too real. I stared at her. Margaret, my voice sounded quieter than I intended. You came all this way because of me? She nodded slowly. I know how it sounds. I'm not sure how it sounds. A sad smile appeared. Then we're both confused. Despite everything, I laughed. The tension eased for a moment, only a moment, then reality returned. I looked down at my hands. 3 years. 3 years since the divorce, 3 years of separate lives, 3 years of assuming that chapter had ended. Yet somehow, at 2:30 in the morning, in a snowbound airport, Claire's mother was telling me I was the reason she'd traveled across the country. The situation felt surreal. Margaret took a slow breath. I didn't come because I expected anything. I didn't come with a plan. I didn't even know if I would speak to you. Then why come? Her eyes softened, because my sister's question wouldn't leave me alone. The airport lights reflected faintly in the windows. I kept asking myself who I would regret never seeing again. She smiled sadly. At first, I told myself the answer was family, my brother, my cousins, old friends. She shook her head. But every time, I thought of you. The honesty in her voice left no room for misunderstanding, no room for doubt. I looked away, not because I didn't believe her, because I did. And that made it harder, much harder. Outside, the storm battered the glass. Inside, the silence stretched between us. Finally, I spoke. What about Claire? Margaret's expression changed, not defensively, not guiltily, just thoughtfully. I love my daughter more than anything. She smiled softly, and because I love her, I asked her something before I booked this trip. That caught my attention. You talked to her? Margaret nodded. I asked her if she was happy. The answer surprised me. What did she say? Margaret's smile grew, a genuine smile this time. She told me she had never been happier. Relief hit me unexpectedly, not because I still wanted Claire back, but because some part of me had always worried. Margaret noticed. She loves her life, she loves Seattle, and she loves the man she's with. I nodded slowly. For the first time in years, the final piece of that chapter quietly settled into place, no regrets, no unfinished arguments, just acceptance. Margaret looked down at her coffee cup, then back at me. There was something else she said. What? Margaret hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. Then she smiled, a knowing smile, almost amused. Mom, you deserve to be happy too. My heart skipped. The airport suddenly felt very small, very quiet. And as I looked at Margaret across the table, I realized dawn was approaching. And with it, a decision neither of us could avoid much longer. The airport felt different after that. Nothing around us had changed. The storm was still raging. Passengers were still asleep across rows of chairs. The departure boards were still glowing with cancellations. Yet somehow, everything felt different because the truth was finally sitting between us, no longer hidden. No longer avoided. Margaret had come because of me. And now neither of us could pretend otherwise. For a while, we simply sat there, watching snow drift across the dark runway, listening to the quiet hum of the terminal. Then Margaret broke the silence. You don't have to say anything. I looked at her. What makes you think I was going to? Because you're thinking. She smiled. And when you think too much, you become very quiet. I laughed softly. Apparently, everyone in your family studies me. Only the interesting parts. That earned another smile. The tension eased, just enough. But not completely. Because there was still a question hanging in the air. A question neither of us had asked, yet both of us understood. What happens after tonight? Eventually, I looked out toward the snow-covered runway. You know what the strange part is? What? I'm not shocked you came. Margaret blinked. You're not? I shook my head. No. The answer surprised even me. But it was true. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. All those years, all those family gatherings, the conversations, the understanding, the way she always seemed to know what I was thinking before I said it. Maybe the connection had always been there, just hidden beneath different circumstances, different lives. Margaret stared at the floor for a moment, then quietly said, I was afraid you would be angry. Why? Because I waited too long. The answer hit harder than I expected, because I understood exactly what she meant. There are moments in life when timing becomes everything. And sometimes, people meet at the wrong chapter, not because they're wrong for each other, because life isn't ready yet. I looked at her. Maybe neither of us was ready before. Her eyes met mine, neither of us looked away. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to weaken. The snowfall looked lighter now, softer. Like the night was slowly releasing its grip on the world. An airport employee walked past and smiled. Good news! We both looked up. The runways should reopen shortly after sunrise. Then he continued down the terminal, leaving us alone again. Margaret smiled faintly. Looks like reality is coming back. I looked toward the brightening horizon beyond the windows. For the first time all night, a thin line of morning light was visible. Dawn was coming, flights would resume, people would leave. The strange little world we'd been trapped inside would disappear, and suddenly, the question neither of us had wanted to ask became impossible to ignore. When the sun came up, would this simply become a beautiful memory? Or was it the beginning of something neither of us had expected to find? The first hint of sunrise appeared just after 6. A pale orange glow stretched across the horizon beyond the airport windows. The storm had finally passed. The snow-covered runways sparkled beneath the morning light. For the first time all night, people started folded blankets. Coffee lines grew longer. Phones came back to life. The strange world we'd been living in was slowly disappearing. Reality was returning. Margaret and I sat quietly beside the window. Neither of us seemed eager to move. Neither of us seemed eager to acknowledge what came next. A loud announcement echoed through the terminal. Attention passengers. Runway operations have resumed. Updated departure information will be available shortly. The entire airport seemed to exhale. People applauded. A few travelers even cheered. Margaret smiled. Looks like civilizations survived. Barely. She laughed softly. The sound made me realize something. I didn't want this night to end. Not because of what had been said. Because of how easy it had felt. The conversation, the honesty, the quiet understanding. For one night, neither of us had been pretending to be anything other than ourselves. Margaret stared out at the snow. My sister used to say, airports are strange places. Why? Because people arrive as one version of themselves and leave as another. I looked at her. Do you think that's what happened tonight? She smiled. I think tonight forced me to stop running from things. The answer hung between us, then she added, for years I kept telling myself I was protecting everyone, my family, Claire, my memories. She shook her head. Really, I was protecting myself. I understood. More than she realized, because I had spent years doing exactly the same thing, hiding inside routine, inside work, inside old habits, avoiding anything that might require me to start over. A nearby departure screen suddenly changed. Denver boarding in 45 minutes. He stared at it. Margaret noticed. So. I nodded so. Neither of us smiled, because now it was real. The night was ending. The choice was here. Margaret looked down at her hands. Then she surprised me. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. What is that? My hotel reservation. I frowned. I thought your conference wasn't real. It wasn't, she smiled. But the reservation is. I laughed. Only Margaret could make that sentence sound reasonable. Then she handed me the paper. A phone number was written across the back. I looked at it, then at her. You know, there are easier ways to give someone your number. I considered writing it on a napkin. Very romantic, I thought so. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then another boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Time was moving again. Margaret stood, so did I. The terminal suddenly felt much louder than before. Much faster. Much more temporary. She looked at me, not nervously, not uncertainly, just honestly. I'm glad your flight was delayed. I smiled. So am I. The answer surprised neither of us. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, a simple hug, warm, comfortable, real. When she stepped back, her eyes were shining. So what happens now? I looked at the phone number in my hand, then at the woman standing in front of me, the woman who had crossed the country to answer a question she'd been avoiding for years. The woman who had turned one unexpected night into something neither of us would ever forget. Then I smiled. I think we stopped waiting for the right time. Margaret smiled too, a beautiful smile. The kind that belongs to someone finally allowing themselves to hope again. Outside, the storm was gone. Inside, the first flight of the morning was being called. And as we walked together toward the departure gates, neither of us knew exactly what the future looked like. But for the first time in a very long time, we were both looking forward to finding out.